A TV news anchor doesn't show up for work. Iowa, June 1995. 4 a.m. shift. She's never late, never misses. Her producer calls her apartment. No answer. He calls again. She picks up. Groggy. She overslept. She'll be right there. She hangs up, gets ready, walks to her car. In the parking lot, someone is waiting. There are signs of a struggle. Her shoes, her earrings, her car key. Bent. She never made it to work. She was never seen again. Another night. Another mile. Another case that never closed. Tonight, Jodi Huisentruit, 27 years old, television news anchor, KIMT-TV, Mason City, Iowa, June 27, 1995. She had the morning show. Daybreak, 4 a.m. to 7 a.m. She was dedicated, professional, never late. That morning she didn't show up. Her producer called. She answered, said she was coming. She left her apartment, walked to her car, and vanished from a parking lot in the middle of a small town at 4 in the morning. This is what we know. June 26, 1995, evening. Jodi Huisentruit finishes her workday at KMT. She anchors the evening news, 5 p.m. and 6 p.m. broadcast. Normal day. After work, she has plans. A local golf tournament, a charity event. She's been involved for weeks. She goes to the country club. Around 6:30 p.m., she stays for hours, socializing, networking, having fun. People remember her, laughing, smiling, wearing a red dress. She leaves around 11 p.m., says goodnight, tells people she has to work early. 4 a.m. shift. She drives home, to her apartment. The Key apartment, a small complex, Mason City, safe neighborhood. She parks in the lot, space number 20, right outside her building. She goes inside. Around 11:30 p.m., a neighbor sees her. She's carrying something from her car. Looks normal. The neighbor says goodnight. Jodi goes to her apartment. Number 2, ground floor. June 27, 1995. 3 a.m. Jodi's alarm goes off. She has to be at the station by 4 a.m. Prep for the show. Review stories. Do her makeup. Standard routine. But this morning something's different. She doesn't wake up immediately. She's tired. The late night. The golf tournament. She sleeps through the alarm. 4 a.m. Jodi's producer, Amy Cohns, is at the station, waiting. Jodi isn't there. This is unusual. Jodi is never late. Amy waits a few minutes. 4:10 a.m. Still no Jodi. Amy calls her apartment. The phone rings and rings. No answer. Amy calls again. 4:15 a.m. This time, Jodi picks up. She sounds groggy, half asleep. I overslept. I'm so sorry. I'll be right there. Amy says, okay, hurry. They have 45 minutes until air. Jodi hangs up. She gets out of bed. Quickly. She doesn't shower. No time. She throws on clothes, jeans, a red shirt, grabs her keys, her purse. She leaves the apartment, locks the door behind her, walks to the parking lot. It's still dark. 4:20 a.m. The sun won't rise for another hour. The parking lot is empty, quiet. Jodi walks to her car. A white Mazda Miata, convertible, top down. She keeps it that way. Summer in Iowa. She approaches the car, unlocks it, or tries to. Something happens. Someone is there, waiting. There's a struggle. Jodi fights. Her shoes come off. Her earrings, scattered on the pavement. Her car key, bent, as if used as a weapon, or in a desperate attempt to get away. Then, nothing. Silence. 4:30 a.m. At KIMT, Amy is waiting. The show starts in 30 minutes. Still no Jodi. Amy tries calling again. No answer. She calls Jodi's apartment manager. Can you check on her? The manager goes to Jodi's apartment. Knocks. No answer. Checks the parking lot. Jodi's car is there. White Mazda. Still parked in space 20. But Jodi isn't in it. The manager notices something. Items on the ground. Near the car. Shoes. Women's high heels. Earrings. A blow dryer. Still in a bag. Scattered. Like there was a struggle. The manager calls police. Mason City police arrive. Within minutes, they secure the scene. The parking lot. Jodi's car. They examine the evidence. A pair of white high heels. Women's size 7. Jodi's size. Palm print earrings. Jodi wore them often. A blow dryer. Still in a Target bag. A key. Bent. twisted, as if used in a struggle. The key fits Jodi's car, but it's damaged, nearly unusable. Investigators find more drag marks on the pavement, leading from the car toward the street, as if someone was pulled or dragged. They find a small amount of blood, not much, just droplets, near the driver's side door. They test it. It's Jodi's blood type, type A. They check her apartment, door locked, no signs of forced entry. Inside, everything looks normal, her bed unmade. She left in a hurry. Her purse is there, on the counter, her wallet inside, cash, credit cards, all there. Her TV is on, still playing. She left it on. Police interview neighbors. Did anyone see anything? Hear anything? Most were asleep. It's 4 a.m. But one neighbor remembers something. Around 4 or 4:30 a.m., she heard a scream. A woman's scream. Brief, then silence. She didn't think much of it. Thought it was an argument, or a cat. She went back to sleep. Another neighbor saw something. A white van, parked near the apartment complex. Around 4 a.m. Didn't think it was unusual. But now, maybe it was. Police canvassed the area, looking for the van, checking surveillance cameras. But Mason City is small. Not many cameras, not in 1995. They find nothing. They interview Jodi's co-workers, friends, family. Everyone says the same thing. Jodi was happy, successful, loved her job. No enemies, no threats, no reason to disappear. But investigators find something. Jodi had been receiving attention from men, fans, viewers. She was a local celebrity, young, pretty, on TV every morning. Some of the attention was unwanted. Letters, phone calls. A few people stood out. One man in particular, John Vansis, a local businessman, older, mid-40s. He knew Jodi. They were friends, or he thought they were. Jodi had been to his house for parties, social events, but some people said Vansis was obsessed, that he had feelings for Jodi, that she didn't reciprocate. Police interview him. June 27th, the day Jodi disappeared. Vansis is cooperative. He says he saw Jodi the night before. At the golf tournament, they talked. She seemed fine. He says he went home, alone, went to bed. He has no alibi. He lives alone. Police ask to search his property. He agrees. They search his house, his cars. They find nothing. No evidence, no blood, no sign of Jodi. Vansis takes a polygraph. The results are inconclusive. Not a pass, not a fail. Inconclusive. Police keep him as a person of interest, but they don't have enough to arrest him. They investigate other leads, other men. Jodi had dated someone recently. It ended amicably, or so everyone thought. Police interview him. He has an alibi. He was out of town. Confirmed. They look into stalkers, obsessed fans, anyone who sent letters, made calls. Several names come up. All investigated, all cleared, or not enough evidence. Weeks pass, no sign of Jodi, no body, no ransom, no contact, just gone. And this is where the story gets strange. Jodi's car key was bent, twisted, almost unusable. Why? Investigators believe she used it as a weapon, tried to stab her attacker, or tried to gouge, scratch, fight back. But a car key doesn't bend easily. It takes force, significant force. Someone stepped on it, or crushed it, during the struggle. This tells investigators something. Jodi fought hard, and there's something else. The scream. The neighbor heard it. Around 4 to 4:30 a.m. A woman's scream. Brief, then silence. If Jodi screamed, why didn't anyone else hear it? The apartment complex isn't large. Several units, multiple people, but only one person heard it, or only one person reported it. And the white van. Another neighbor saw it, parked near the complex, around 4 a.m. No description, no license plate, just a white van. Police searched. They found several white vans in the area, owned by local businesses, all checked, all cleared. But what if it wasn't local? What if someone came from out of town, waited, watched, knew Jodi's routine, knew she left for work at 4 a.m., knew she'd be alone, in the dark, vulnerable? Investigators looked into this. checked motels, gas stations, anyone passing through. Nothing. And there's another detail. Jodi's apartment door was locked. When she left, she locked it behind her. This suggests she left willingly. Normally, if she was being chased, would she stop to lock the door? Probably not, so she walked out. Locked up. Walked to her car. Everything normal. Then, someone was waiting. At the car. Not at the door. They ambushed her. At the vehicle. Why there? Because it's darker. More isolated. The parking lot. No windows facing it directly. Less chance of witnesses. Whoever took Jodi, they knew what they were doing. They planned it. In 2001, investigators searched a lake near Mason City. A tip said Jodi might be there. Divers went down, searched for days. Nothing. In 2003, they searched a farm. Another tip, cadaver dogs, ground-penetrating radar. Nothing. In 2017, they searched a property owned by someone connected to Jodi, someone who knew her. They dug. They sifted. Nothing. Jodi Huisentruit was taken from a parking lot in a small Iowa town. At 4 in the morning, she fought. She screamed, but no one saved her. And 30 years later, no one knows where she is. Theory 1. John Van Cise is responsible. He was obsessed with Jodi. She rejected him. He couldn't handle it. He waited for her. That morning, knew her routine, knew she'd be alone. He took her. This explains his failed polygraph, his lack of alibi, his connection to her. But it doesn't explain the lack of evidence. Police searched his property multiple times. They found nothing. No blood, no sign of Jodi, no body. And Van Cise has never been charged, never arrested. He maintains his innocence. Theory 2. It was a stranger, someone passing through, saw Jodi on TV, became obsessed, stalked her, learned her routine, waited for the right moment, early morning, dark, alone. He took her. This explains the lack of local suspects, the white van, the planning. But it doesn't explain how. How did a stranger know her schedule? Know she'd be in the parking lot at exactly 4:20 a.m.? That takes inside knowledge. Theory 3. It was someone she knew. Not Van Cise, someone else. An ex-boyfriend. A co-worker. Someone with access. Knowledge. They arranged to meet. Or showed up unexpectedly. Things went wrong. An argument. A struggle. They panicked. Took her. Killed her. Hid the body. This explains the planning. The timing. But it doesn't explain who. Everyone close to Jodi was investigated. Alibis checked. No one fits. Theory 4. It was a serial predator. Someone who targets women. Early morning. Parking lots. Isolated situations. Jodi fit the profile. Young. Alone. Predictable routine. He took her. Like he'd taken others. This explains the professionalism. The lack of evidence. But it doesn't explain the lack of similar cases. No other abductions. No pattern. At least none connected. Theory 5. Jodi is still alive. Taken. Held somewhere. Against her will. For years. This would explain the lack of a body. The lack of closure. But it's statistically unlikely. 30 years. No sightings. No contact. No ransom. If she's alive, where? Every theory has problems. Every suspect has been cleared. Or not enough evidence. In the months after Jodi disappeared, her family never gave up. They hired private investigators, put up billboards, offered a reward, $100,000, for information. Tips came in, hundreds, from across the country. Psychics, witnesses, people who saw something. Most led nowhere. In 2001, John Van Cise was named a person of interest, publicly, by police. He denied involvement. He moved away from Mason City, started over. He's never been charged. In 2011, another person of interest emerged, Tony Jackson, a convicted felon. He was in Iowa in 1995, near Mason City. He'd assaulted women before. Police investigated, searched properties connected to him. Nothing. In 2017, Jackson was declared a person of interest, officially. He died in 2020, in prison, for another crime. He never confessed, never gave information. The case stayed cold. In 2018, a new lead. Someone came forward, said they knew where Jodi was buried. A specific location, near Clear Lake, Iowa. Police investigated, brought in equipment, searched. Nothing. The tip was false, or wrong. In 2021, Jodi's case was featured on 48 Hours. National attention. New tips, new energy. Investigators followed up. Nothing concrete. Mason City Police still work the case. They have a dedicated investigator. They receive tips regularly. They follow every lead. But 30 years later, Jodi Huisentruit is still missing. Her family created a foundation, FindJodi.com. They keep her story alive. They won't give up. Every year on June 27th, a vigil in Mason City, at the parking lot where she was taken. Fewer people come now, but her family is always there, waiting, hoping. As of 2026, Jodi Huisentruit has been missing for 31 years. Her case is still open. Mason City Police still investigate. The Iowa Division of Criminal Investigation is involved. The FBI has offered resource. Jodi would be 58 years old now. Her family maintains the website, FindJodi.com. They post updates, share information, encourage tips. The reward stands, $100,000, for information leading to Jodi, or her remains. In 2023, new DNA technology was applied to evidence from the scene. The blood, the key, items from her car. Investigators are hopeful, but no announcements yet. The parking lot where Jodi was taken, still there. The key apartment, most of the original tenants are gone. New people live there now. They don't know the history, don't know that 31 years ago, a young woman was dragged from that spot and never seen again. KIMT still broadcast. The morning show continued. Different anchors now, but in the station, they remember Jodi. Her photo is still there, in the newsroom. A reminder, if you have information about Jodi Huisentruit's disappearance, contact the Mason City Police Department, 641-421-3636, or visit FindJodi.com to submit tips. There is a $100,000 reward. The road keeps going. The morning news still airs, every day, 4:00 a.m. A young woman walked to her car, in a parking lot, in a small Iowa town. Someone was waiting. She fought. She screamed, but no one came. 31 years later, the parking space is empty, but the question remains, who was waiting for Jodi Huisentruit that morning? If you know something about this case, the comments are open. If you want more roads like this, I'll keep driving.